Welcome to the May 1st CNAB developers meeting. Today, a lot of people are out because of DockerCon and some other and a Microsoft on-site meeting in San Francisco, but we still have some really good items on the agenda today, one of which we definitely want to get kicked off because I think it'll take us a few sessions to work through some of it. At this time in the meeting, if anybody is on the call for the first time and would like to introduce themselves, either by unmuting and talking or just dropping something in the chat window, that's great, and I'll give a moment of pause for that. Moment of pause, sounds so. All right, so moving on. So we don't have any demos today, but we do have an updates on several different discussion topics. Very quickly, I want to announce sort of publicly right now that we are pursuing moving the CNAB spec into the JDF, which is the Joint Documentation Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation. And the idea there is to move it into a neutral party who's well adept at managing intellectual property and in providing a grounds for multiple organizations to work together in order to do a standard. So we are well into the process of learning about it, and this week is the first week where we've really started trying to do the paperwork portion of this. So based on the current core maintainership, people from Microsoft, Docker, and Pivotal will each be invited to join the foundation officially. If you're not on that list and you would like your company to be, or you individually to be represented, let us know, and we'll add you to the list of people interested in joining. So we just formally started kicking off this process really yesterday, so it'll take a little bit. But anybody who's interested in this particular process, let us know, because I think we're actually officially at that place where it's useful to have people kind of jump in, and we can basically, the first part of the investigation was, is JDF the right place? We looked at several different places. JDF really felt very much at home for us. It gives us a high degree of independence as to how we structure our projects and things like that, but it handles the IP handling and fast tracks us into standardization in other organizations like IETF, I think, is one of them. So it looks really cool. I'm excited about that. That's all I have on that front. And again, feel free to hit me up or Lockie up in the Slack channel, and we can discuss anything else. Otherwise, I hope that I'll have another update to give on that 2 weeks from now. Okay, that's it for that update. Any questions before we move on? All right. Next up on the agenda is storing CNAB bundles and OCI registries, and Radu is marked on that one, so go ahead.
Okay, sure.
I'll try and take notes while you're doing that. Thanks.
I'm gonna share the screen for a bit. I've been working on a document for the past week, documenting the various approaches to storing CNAB bundles into OCI registries. And in doing that, I also started working on a little tool that pulls and pushes both thin and thick bundles to registries. So right now we have an open pull request for duffle to add push and pull support to OCI registries using CNAB to OCI, which is a project that Docker has been working on. And essentially, for a bit of context, this project, what it does, it uses a Docker distribution manifest list to store the data inside the bundle together with all referenced images. Now, this is one approach. Pivotal and Glyn in particular has been working on a different library called image relocation. Now, what this does is it deals with all referenced images, and it relocates them into a single OCI registry under different repositories to make sure that they're all in the same place. And then there's DaySlab Auras, which deals with storing various random files in OCI registries. Now, the reason for starting this whole discussion is to restart the work on the CNAB repository specification and registry specification. In doing so, essentially, I also started working on a tool that uses ORAS and the pivotal image relocation tool to store the bundle as an ORAS file in the registry, and then all referenced images as in the same repository under different tags. So essentially, let me know if you can actually see my screen. I've been showing tabs, and I'm not sure if those are visible. Okay. So this is a simple bundle that references two images. It references one image and one invocation image. And I have a branch of duffle that essentially is able to push this using ORAS and relocate all images into a single repository. So I can do a duffle push. This has been tested with Azure Container Registries and the upstream Docker distribution. So if all registries that are compatible with Docker distribution should be able to use this. So at this point, I can go in a CNAB meeting, and there's one tag for v1, which is the tag that I gave to the bundle, and then there are two tags for the referenced images. Now, the strategy for actually relocating the referenced images into the repository is still up for debate. I've been having a chat with Glyn about it. Should we include digests and other things? But this is mainly how it looks like. It's also able to push thick bundles as well. Now, are there any questions so far?
I've got a basic one, which is what's the point of duffle push?
Sorry, could you ask again?
Yeah, what's the point of duffle push?
Duffle push should take a bundle that is local, either in the local bundle store or as a file, and first of all, store the bundle into an OCI registry. And at this point, what this does is also relocates all referenced images into the same registry.
Yeah, I understand, but what's the point of it? Why would you do that?
So essentially, at this point, I can give you the URL for the registry, and then any machine can pull the bundle and all referenced images. That's the main point of it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
The same thing achieves the CNAB to OCI achieves the same thing, but it stores the CNAB bundle into a different form, and that's also a discussion that I'd like to have. So, other questions? Okay, and on.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Go ahead.
Lunchtime on the East Coast, so so for this, obviously we're kind of focusing on OCI bundles or OCI images, just because they're kind of the most straightforward ones. Would this be able to also have like a binary blob and just have it stored as a layer and referenced like that?
Yes.
Worst way.
Yeah, the way ORAS works, which is a project that a bunch of people from the community have been working on, allows you to store any arbitrary files into OCI registries. ORAS essentially means OCI registry as storage. And the same library is able to also push and pull thick bundles, which are essentially gzip files. Does that answer your question? Go ahead, Steve.
I just want to give the person the answer. I was curious about Glyn's question for duffle push. I was waiting for the second follow-up because Glyn, when you ask what's the purpose of push, what were you thinking is a way to get a bundle into a registry in the first place if it's not push?
Oh, yeah, I just don't understand why you'd want to do that. really. I mean, I can see that there's maybe a networking issue, that if you've got a restricted network, then you can pile everything into a registry, and that gives you a slice of the network to deal with. But why not just pass a thin bundle around that refers to registries all over the internet? That seems equally viable.
Well, I guess so there's an interesting question about thick and thin bundles, because so I'll defer that one for a second. But if I have a registry that's got literally nothing in it to start, it's clean slate, and I've got a bundle which is a collection of some images, whether one's an invocation image, one's an image, one's a Helm chart. We've announced the Singularity work that we've been doing as well. So I have a Singularity file, a SIF, that I also want to be in my bundle. What if I want to push that to this registry, this private registry? How would I do that without duffle push? Like, I know you know the space, so I'm thinking you have another thought process.
Oh, okay. So our approach used in the past is to just relocate images. So I guess if you want to use a registry as a means of passing around bundles, and it's legitimate to put a bundle in registry. Just as a kind of transmission medium.
Oh, so you were thinking that the bundle is decoupled from the images, so the images somehow got into that private registry separately.
Yeah.
And the bundle, wherever you got the bundle from, is still a valid place to get the bundle from, and now you're just relocating the image references. Is that what you were suggesting?
Yes.
Okay. So I think the least mental model that I had been thinking is I get the bundle and all its references to images and manifests and other things from registry A, but I want to move it to my private registry. And I hate to jump on the thing from last Friday, but it's a good reminder of why we want to buffer artifacts from any public or any place in particular, in public or otherwise, and move it into something that each company controls themselves. So the idea there is I would want the entire thing that makes up the bundle, the CNAB, to move holistically from point A to point B, registry A to registry B. So that was the thought process, is that I build a bundle. It has the declaration stuff of defines it. It has all the things that it references, whether it be images that I deploy, an invocation image that I run, a Singularity, a Helm chart, a binary, as somebody mentioned. And those were all separate artifacts in the registry that get moved. Think of it when I do when I do image index, and I can copy it, I can import it from one registry to another. There's no standard for it, but a number of the cloud registries have done this. Like we have ACR import, and that'll import from Docker Hub into ACR, or in ACR registry 1 to ACR registry 2. And it takes the entire index and all the images that it references and moves them, keeping the digest. I was thinking CNAB was the same model. There's this index and all the things that it references. It just so happened the CNAB can reference more things more than just images.
Yeah, and at least the way I think about it, it's helpful to have the CNAB bundle available in a remote location in situations where the place where I built the bundle is not necessarily the same place I want to execute the invocation image. So think about the bundle is built in a CI system, and then I want to execute as part of my cluster or run it as a pod, the invocation image as a pod. How else would I get the actual bundle from the location it was built into my cluster where I can execute it?
Yeah, I mean, in Pivotal, we've got a pre-existing solution called PivNet. So customers download binaries from PivNet and then obtain images from various locations. So it's kind of a pre-existing solution. So in that kind of hybrid world, we'd use PivNet for obtaining the bundle and then use registry technology for relocating, etc.
Yeah, that would work, I guess. And which brings me to another question, which is we've been talking about relocating invocation referenced images extensively so far. Should the CNAB registry specification state where referenced images should be stored. So for example, if I store a CNAB bundle into a specific repository, should or may or must the referenced images be in the same registry or repository? Does anyone have strong opinions about that?
I mean, I can talk about what we've had to do with Windows foreign layers and how much people hate that. I struggle with must, because every time you come up with a thing, there's always an exception. But for me, I think that the idea that, especially if you think about companies that want to lock down an environment, whether it's air gapped or not is an extreme of that. But we have customers that are doing VNet, locking down ACR into VNets, and they don't want references to external things. So I struggle to say that that's a must, that I can't reference something from someplace else, because I'm sure somebody's got a good reason for it. But I would venture to say the default would be that when I move something from A to B, everything moves with it. And the exception is, for some reason, one of the things, whether it be the bundle definition or one of the artifacts, could remain in another location. But I struggle with that one, because that just leads to the, it's not like registries are in some big distributed transaction thing that if I start deploying A and then B is unavailable and C works, what kind of state does that leave me in? And while all things coming from a single registry doesn't guarantee, certainly makes it, but I think Glyn, I didn't quite everything that Glyn described in the example, but that might be an example of a valid case where a quote exception might be valid. I just don't. I struggle on the norm of that.
Yeah,
I mean, I would say that if the images and bundles are in different repositories on the same registry, then potentially you've got the same networking and availability properties that you have with a single repository.
Yeah, and
a same registry, totally agree. Whether a different paths in the same registry, I think is 100% part of the default. I was referring to the login URL being, the thing you authenticate against, the thing that where the VNet connected to. Those are the things that worries me when they're in different ones. I view different folders in the same registry as a default scenario.
Okay.
Okay, this is still an open discussion, so feel free to comment on the document with thoughts that you have in this space. Another question, and I think I'm going to also keep this discussion topic for next week as well, when people working on CNAB to OCI are back. Before pushing the bundle, CNAB to OCI deconstructs the bundle and maps the information inside the bundle into various annotations to a distribution manifest list or OCI index, together with other split manifests. And according to the security specification, before pulling a bundle from a registry, you have to fetch the signature from the tough endpoint and the digest and the size, and then compare it to whatever you pulled. Now, in the current case, CNAB to OCI doesn't have an actual representation of the bundle inside the registry, and you have to reconstruct it back whenever you pull it. One idea would be to store the digest and sum of the bundle as annotations, and then pull the annotation and then reconstruct the bundle and check against the digest and size. The question is, does this invalidate the security specification?
I think that I'll start with annotations. To me, make me very nervous for something that's supposed to be required, because they're very optional and ephemeral. They're not something that's required. The work we've been doing to try to make things much more understandable and definitive in a registry is to leverage the config object. And that if this either a config object or it's literally another layer or another object that can be placed into the registry. I think one of the main things that could be summarized between the OCI to CNAB thing, sorry, the CNAB to OCI thing, or the ORAS approach, is ORAS kind of takes the concept that there's generic artifacts that can be pushed to a registry irregardless. They don't have to be quote Docker images and follow a Docker image format, because OCI gives that extensibility. Where I believe the CNAB to OCI thing kind of makes everything a Docker image, and put some undue constraints on things by doing that. I'd really like to see the registry fully understand what this thing is, and a client CLI know exactly what these things are, and so that any client tools can not guess and hope that somebody's followed something, but the spec specifically says this is how you store these things. OCI distribution will say, here's the general structure, and here's the buckets to put things in, like the config object. And then each artifact type will know how to pull its specifics out of that object.
Okay,
So,
and please.
as the author of the security spec, what makes me nervous about the CNAB to OCI model is that in order to reconstruct the bundle, in order to verify the hashes, you have to trust the pieces of the bundle enough client-side to try and reconstruct it client-side. Which, while there's no obvious vector of attack there, that's always kind of an iffy thing, right? When I'm reassembling multiple pieces of data and assuming that piece A is of this type and piece B is of that type, and especially once I start getting into parsing data like this, it's hard to justify treating that as trusted before assembling it into something and verifying that it's trusted. So that part is what makes me nervous about the solution on the security side.
Yeah, also it seems very fragile, because what's the chance of being able to reconstruct a binary bundle with the right digest? Seems slim.
CNAB to OCI doesn't have a representation for binary files, thick bundles or anything. It only deals with thin bundles.
Right, but isn't the idea that when you pull the bundle, it will be byte for byte equal to the bundle you pushed?
Yeah, with the actual bundle JSON file, yes.
Yeah. So if it's got to be identical, then you've got to preserve the digest amongst other things.
Yeah. And then the last point that I have is around thick bundles and transmitting thick bundles. The specifications at some point states that when transmitting thick bundles, some implementations may decompose them to transfer them more efficiently as layers. And I have a question whether, when specifically dealing with OCI registries, the CNAB registry specification might dictate that thick bundles should not be decomposed. Essentially, the whole reason behind decomposing a bundle when transmitting it is to recompose it back as a thick bundle after it arrives on the network. Because we don't have a way to run custom code on the registry side, it means that the thick bundle inside the OCI registry will again be referenced as the layers that it's composed of. So you have no way of recomposing it back on the registry. So would it make sense that this specification dictate that implementations should not decompose it? If you want to store a thick bundle in an OCI registry, you get the gzip file that you get from the export operation. I'm wondering if people have thoughts about this.
So this is where I'm really curious what is the definition and purpose of a thick bundle? I have an assumption in my head, but I want to say, because I'm confused on why a persistence in a registry is different for thick or thin bundles. So can I just get an explanation of what we think thick and thin bundles use case and purpose are?
I think there's an entire document in the spec and an issue thread that I can point you to.
Yeah, I can give you some of the short, Steve, and actually, if you hit me offline, I can give you some more of the historical environments that I've worked in banking and all, and how their networks are laid out. But the gist of it is, and to start off, I think there is a question of the persistence in the registry versus the persistence as a thick bundle. If those two actually do vary, and how much they is there a way to kind of converge those, just to try and so we don't have multiple ways of representing it. I think I like that. I like that way of describing it as the representation in the registry versus representation as a thick bundle is, a tar GZ. Because I think that was actually another follow up I had already. Is I'm still trying to kind of grok the document that you posted. So when you push that, as far as the registry is concerned, it gets given multiple layers, or multiple things that it gets, but it's not one big giant. It's not the tar GZ. It still needs to be reassembled. So if I did a duffle pull thick or whatever the syntax would be, to get that into our tar GZ format, it would have to pull everything separately and then pack it in.
No, the current implementation actually takes the archived file, pushes it to the registry as an archived file, and then it pulls it as an archived file. So it stays in the same representation as it was exported.
Okay.
As one big tar file?
Yes.
Okay, so I do understand the basic concepts, but I was trying to get a repeat of it because I was trying to tease out some specifics. So one of the things that we love about registries, especially compared to the VM of 20 years ago, is the layered persistence format, that it allows me to reuse layers that I might already have, or I could stream multiple blobs down to the client separately and they get reassembled because they're all layered. The idea that, whether it's thick or thin, I thought of that being a client scenario that I am trying to move it between one and another. How I get it to the client to be a thick bundle should be irrelevant in my thought process. So in other words, if I'm pulling a bundle, whether it's thick or thin, the registry still stores it as all its individual pieces. I want to be careful not to use the word artifacts in this case, but we'll use artifacts and layers. And the fact that it makes it thick is on the client. It says, oh, by the way, all these loose pieces that I got as one thing when the pull was done. I want to package it up into something because I'm trying to move it to an air-gapped environment. I'm trying to move it from point A to point B. So it's more of a client tarring than the registry just says, I have this thing. I know this thing is called the foo, and it's got a collection of other things. And I can leverage all of the magic that a registry has for understanding these things, all the work we want to be able to do that says, hey, this bundle actually is made up of these other artifact types that might be referenced by other, quote, thick bundles, so that two thick bundles don't have to store some monstrous artifact type individually. They both can leverage the reference sharing.
The thought process behind that when I wrote that was, you have an OCI registry available for you. If you want to store the bundle efficiently, you can always push the thin bundle as a thin bundle and push an actual and let essentially what you're saying is that we would be re-implementing pushing all the layers into the registry. If you want to store it efficiently, you can always push the thin bundle and then relocate all the images into the available OCI registry. One reason that I had in mind when thinking about that was the thing you get with thick bundles in their archived representation is you get a digest and a sum for the entire thing. If you deconstruct it, aren't we in the same situation as reconstructing it from pieces and then trusting that whatever operation you did gave you the same digest?
Well, so isn't the culmination of a bunch of, like, each one, whether they're thick or thin, we still want security on them. So individually, each one has a digest that should be verified and signed and all the magic that Matt's working on. isn't the thick bundle validation just a validation of all the individual pieces? Because I do struggle on the idea that I have to deal with it completely differently in the storage, and of course all the downloads as well. It means that all of a sudden the registry doesn't have a singularity image, a Helm chart, an image, an invocation image, and a CNAB definition. It's got this yet another thing that is one big monstrous thing. And if the benefit is for security, I struggle that isn't security just the sum of all its parts?
So I think we reasoned through this a lot with Simone, and probably next week when he gets back, or next meeting, in between, you could fill in some of the things we were discussing when we were going through this. Because I think we started out with, one big giant monolithic, tar file at the registry side. But I think that, and I think what we ended up with, and what I think is the right direction, is to almost echo how it is with Docker, where if I do Docker push, it pushes all 17 layers. But then if I do a Docker, and I can't remember if it's Docker save or Docker export or whatever the Docker command is to get just a tarball, then that's kind of the in-between, where I don't think that, like, and a Docker registry doesn't have any concept of the tarball. Because I actually think I was talking with you, Steve, about this a couple months ago, because I wanted to go tarballs directly to the registry. And when you think about it, you have to unpack it to be able to push the layers separately. And I think that we want to preserve the registry being able to do that content deduplication. And I think that we can do what we want to on the thick bundle side, and having that one digestible tarball without changing how we interact with the registry. And I think that's what I'm hearing, and where I see that there's kind of crossing two different paths.
I think the
export, or I can't remember if it's export or save. It is just a client side thing that effectively is exactly what you just described.
I think the title you put in the document, Radu, was interesting. You talked about transmitting a thick bundle. I've lost the document for the moment. Transmitting a thick bundle on an OCI registry or via an OCI registry or something. And so the big question for me is it essential that the thick bundle that is retrieved is identical to the thick bundle that was sent? Or is it just a kind of insecure wrapper of secure pieces that you can kind of validate together? For instance, if the resultant thick bundle had extra images in that that weren't in the original and which are unreferenced, would that be a violation? It might be that these images haven't been, in our case, we haven't done security checks on them, so or copyright checks, those kind of things. It might be illegal. So.
Yeah, and that's why I was kind of asking the question of what is the definition of a thick bundle, because if a thick bundle is just a packaging format for all of the artifacts, then what you described as there's extra things in it, that's not a thick bundle, it's a different bundle. It's a superset bundle.
Just to be clear on this discussion, I don't actually have a strong opinion here. I was just coming from the point that if I want to have a digestible thing and have it the same representation as the thing I exported, then I would kind of have to store the large gzip file. But if that also makes sense, deduplication and everything. So feel free to comment on the document. It would be really helpful. Thanks.
Can I pause the conversation and offer Glyn the chance here to jump in with his diagram and the stuff he talked about, so that doesn't drop off, because I think that's highly relevant to what we're talking about. So if you'd like to do that, Glyn, and nobody objects, we still have time.
Yeah,
so I'm sorry, I know I joined late, but who is this person that's sitting in Matt's office that's very clean shaven?
Don't make me tell the Axl Rose costume story and how I lost my beard.
Okay, I guess I'll watch the video or something. All right.
Okay, I hope that's okay with you, Radu. Let's just get my picture up.
Sure, that was last item that I had. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. So I was just trying to get my mind around duffle because I still don't understand all the operations. And I was looking at import, export, and relocate, and trying to figure out what happened to the images. And I drew this picture. I wanted to run it by this group so that you could point out any mistakes in the first instance, but also so we could talk about the rationale of it. So the way I've drawn it is we start off with a thin bundle, some sort of bundle.json, which refers to some repositories, images in repositories. So that's the dashed line, as it were. And then this kind of moves around the system in various ways. So since we just talked about thick bundles, let's talk about export. So export produces a TGZ, and it copies the images from the original repositories into the bundle. And there's a choice about the representation, but that's not very important. Then someone later can import the bundle, and they'll get an imported JSON file equivalent to the bundle.json that was exported, and a bunch of images get loaded into the Docker daemon. But the image references still point back at the original repositories. There's been no relocation. Then if we look at the relocation operations, they take a bundle and produce a relocated bundle with different image references, which then point to the relocated repositories. And those operations also move or copy the images from the original source to the relocated repositories. The bit that's throwing me really here is the Docker daemon, and the reference back to the original repositories. And I'm trying to work out what the point of import populating the Docker daemon is. Is it just a performance optimization, or is it a kind of protection against a network boundary, or what?
So among the stories we want to be able to tell are so the import runs and imports the images somewhere, right? But the thing that actually executes the invocation image may not be local and executing on the same exact environment that the thing that ran the import is running on, right? So there are cases where we want to import, so some of the IoT edge cases are good examples of this, where the boundary node on an IoT device would perform the import and do all the signature verification and things like that. But the actual invocation images might run on another node on that internal network. There are also other cloud cases where, like in Kubernetes, for example, if you're running one of these on Kubernetes, Kubernetes itself may be responsible for spinning up the invocation image and executing that as a container in a pod. And the container in the pod might not have the same access to the file system that whatever the thing was that ran the original import had. Yeah. So in those cases, the image cannot merely exist on the local file system, and the most expedient place to store it is inside of the Docker daemon, if there's a shared Docker daemon, right?
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's in an internal registry. So we have multiple cases there that we want to be able to handle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. If there's a Docker daemon shared, that makes perfect sense. But it's it just seems to be a performance optimization.
Well, otherwise we have to solve an out-of-band data transmission problem too, right? Or require everybody to run an internal registry, which is a little bit harder in some of the IoT cases, but possibly.
Okay. So the assumption there is that once the images are populated in the Docker daemon, that somehow protects you from having to go back to the original repositories. Okay, I wasn't sure that was a guarantee of the Docker daemon. It might behave that way most of the time, but I wasn't sure that was actually a guarantee.
I don't know if it's a guarantee of the Docker daemon itself, but it is something that container runtimes can do, right?
Yeah, okay.
Because again, we're not always strictly dealing with Docker. A lot of them are embedded Moby implementations or Rocket or other runtimes. But
okay, so
if I'm open to the idea that there's a simplifying assumption that we can make here that would not be overly burdensome on some of the edge cases, but would make more sense than what we have here.
Yeah, so it sounds like essentially that import is similar to relocation, but without requiring an internal registry. So it's like relocation on the cheap, if you like.
That's an excellent way of phrasing it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of used to Kubernetes, where you won't necessarily have a Docker daemon in sight. So, we tend to use registries. That's fine. Okay, I don't know if anybody else has got comments on that diagram, mistakes, questions, that kind of thing.
So since I'm doing double duty, taking notes and chatting with you about this, are you raising the question of whether we could make a simplification and cut out the Docker daemon from the import and merely focus on relocation? Or are you just
well, that would certainly suit the use cases that I'm interested in, but there are a bunch of other people that probably like Docker daemon, most of whom are probably not present, so we ought to revisit that another time. Okay, I think that's it then for that diagram.
Someone remind me, are we on 45-minute meetings now or hour-long meetings now? We've changed this too frequently.
1 hour.
Okay. So we can either return, first of all, does anybody else have things that they would like to raise that was not on the agenda, or did the agenda get changed while I've been? All right, well, if people feel like there's more to talk about that I cut you off on Radu's earlier topic, we can return to that. Otherwise, we can end a few minutes early. It's up to you guys. Silence seems to mean we're ending early. So going once, going twice, 30 times, sold. All right. Thank you all for coming again. We're doing every other week this time. So in 2 weeks, we will reconvene. Vashi will be leading that meeting. Do we have any volunteers to do notes, or do we usually do notes on the fly? I think we do notes on the fly for that one, right? So as usual, if you've got ideas for things you'd like to discuss, feel free to drop them in on the Markdown document or contact Vashi and ask to have that placed on there. Thank you all for attending. This was a very productive, very great conversation. Looking forward to having Docker back next week so that we can probably keep turning the conversation on various storage things because I think the next kinds of pieces of the spec we want to be filling in are the registry and the security specifications. So I just want to end with a general kind of timeline for what we're hoping to do. The core specification, thanks to the input of all the people on this call and many more, has made progress by leaps and bounds. But we want to get closer and closer to just kind of finding a point that we can lock down to a 1.0. So what I'd like to propose is that we kind of shoot for a midsummer, like end of June freeze date, and try and have 1.0 of the core specification pretty much done so that we can start iterating on 2.0, but also so that we've given a lot of people a fixed point to run an implementation against. And I would like to propose that at that same time, duffle locks down at duffle 1.0 because it is the reference implementation of the specification. And so that would give us a fixed point by the middle of summer. So maybe one of the things we could talk about next week is if there are things we feel very strongly need to make it in the specification, given the pace at which we operate, it would be good to know that now so that we can get things locked down at that time. How does that sound to people?
Yeah, sounds good.
Silence is tacit approval. Yeah.
And where does this leave the rest of the specifications, the security, registry, claims, and everything else?
I think that realistically, we have to make progress on those in that time frame, and we should be getting fairly close, but the intention was to be able to move those 3 specs at separate speeds if we need to. So as the core specification sort of naturally seems to be slowing down a little bit, and we seem to be zeroing in on things, I think naturally those other 2 should pick up steam. I know that Michelle has been working with NYU to kind of revisit the security spec, and I know that several people have shown renewed interest in the registry spec now that we've hit the freeze point, right? We wanted to make sure we can make it through DockerCon and KubeCon without major shifts, and now we're all kind of getting anxious to get going on the spec and batten down the hatches on it. So, but I don't feel like I'm open. If people want to try and freeze that at the end of June, I'm totally open to that. But I think the point of breaking down the spec into 3 was to allow it to progress separately as we kind of explore the difficulties of each of these different specs. That's a really long way of saying I'm not sure.
I had a logistical question. I thought I heard you say every other week, and then I heard you reference next week. Well, I got confused.
I probably did say next week. I meant every other, no, 2 weeks from now. We are officially on every other week at 1 hour, right? So, yeah.
That being said, I'd love to pick up the conversation about registries in Slack.
Okay. I agree. Anything else?
Yeah, we're happy to. Yeah, I'm happy to help. In fact, I still owe an update to the distribution spec for some of the stuff, and without a deeper conversation, I've been unable to. I haven't pushed on the index elements that we've been discussing. So if we can tease that out, it would be good to know how to push on that for the spec changes we want to do the distribution.
Yep, that's a good point. We can drop that on the agenda next time. I almost said next week again. Next time, and see if there's anything we can do there. All right. Thank you all for coming and participating. This was very productive. We'll see you in a few weeks.
All right.
Thanks, folks.